Welcome back. It's been a while since we've done an Iceberg episode, but due to popular demand, I'm bringing them back. This video is brought to you in part by our amazing channel members, and as always, a link to the sources and the iceberg itself will be provided in the description. But enough of that. It's time to dive back in to the obscure and unsolved mysteries iceberg. We begin this episode with a man by the name Dr. Horatio Bates. Dr. Bates was a very successful ophthalmologist, or eye doctor, from New York in the late 1800s and early 1900s, but his career took a sharp turn in 1902 when Dr. Bates vanished, leaving behind a note to his wife, which read, "My dear wife, I am called out of town to some major operations. I go with Dr. Forsch, an old student, to do a mastoid, some cataracts, and other operations. He promises me a bonanza. Too bad to miss the horse show. But I am glad to get so much money for us all. I am in such a flurry. Do not worry. I will write details later. Yours lovingly, Willie." His wife, Mrs. Bates, had received the note, but time passed, and Dr. Bates had not returned or sent another letter to his wife. Naturally, Mrs. Bates began to worry, and soon she started searching for her husband, asking friends, family, and colleagues of his, and not just in the US, but in Europe as well. She even sought out the help of the Freemason Club in her area, of which Dr. Bates was a member. Some time went by, and eventually Mrs. Bates did receive a letter, only it was not from William. The letter came from Great Britain and informed Mrs. Bates that a man fitting her husband's description was seen working as a medical assistant in a London hospital. The letter described the man as thin, unkempt, and notably, that his eyes appeared to be deeply sunken in. Reportedly, this man, who was believed to be Dr. Bates, had originally been admitted into the hospital, where he was now working as a patient, but sometime after he was treated, this individual got employed there. At this time, Dr. Bates had been missing for around 6 weeks. But as soon as his wife got the letter informing her of his sighting, she flew to London, where she found the man, and as it would turn out, he was indeed Dr. William Bates. Only for some reason, he had no recollection of her at all, or of his past life in New York for that matter. This did not deter Mrs. Bates, who was fully prepared to wait as long as she needed to for her husband to regain his memories and come back home with her. It stated that he even had a very weak recollection of leaving New York to perform some operations, but the memory never fully came to him, and only days after his wife found him, Dr. Bates disappeared yet again. Mrs. Bates did everything in her power to try and locate her husband, but her efforts were fruitless. She searched America and Europe until she passed away, having ultimately been unable to see her husband again. But the story doesn't end there. At some point while he was missing, Dr. Bates ended up in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and in 1910, one of his old friends, Dr. Kelly, from his life in New York, stumbled upon him while he was passing through Grand Forks. Dr. Kelly managed to convince Dr. Bates to come back to New York with him, and the two opened up a clinic on 83rd Street, where both doctors practiced in their respected fields. Though despite opening the practice with his friend, Dr. Bates still did not have his original memories, and for some reason, he was still a great ophthalmologist. It seemed as though that was the only thing that remained from his old self. And even with everything he had gone through, Dr. Bates' career was still far from over. And a few years later, he published a book titled Cure of Imperfect Eyesight by Treatment Without Glasses. But this was eventually labeled as a compendium of misinformation and exaggeration. Dr. Bates' theories basically boiled down to bad eyesight being caused by nervous tension and eye strain. And while these can be contributing factors that cause bad eyesight, they are far from the only causes. According to experts at the time, Dr. Bates' claims went against decades of ophthalmology research. However, despite warnings from experts in the field, Dr. Bates gained a lot of attention, and many people began using his practices. One of these techniques, and probably the worst one, was staring directly into the sun, which was somehow supposed to improve vision. I don't think I need to tell you, but I'm going to anyways. Please, do not stare directly into the sun. Eventually, in 1929, The FTC caught wind of Dr. Bates' controversial eye care treatments and issued a formal complaint against him for the misleading and false claims, but this did nothing to his rise in popularity. More and more people began to employ his techniques, ignoring the warnings of them being harmful. Dr. Bates continued his practice until he retired and later passed away in 1931 at the age of 70, leaving behind a lifetime of ophthalmology research, some very revolutionary and helpful to the field, and some controversial and even outright damaging to those practicing. In the end, he never seemed to have regained his memories from his time in New York, and an explanation for what had caused this memory loss was never found, though some believe that it may have all been an act, either to escape debt or his wife, whom at the time he was reportedly fed up with. But these are just theories. The mystery of what happened to Dr. Bates was never solved, and even still he is praised for his contributions to ophthalmology, despite all his controversies. It's unclear whether his quote, misleading claims about eye care and memory loss were a result of something that happened on his trip out from New York. But despite everything, Dr. William Bates left his mark on the world, and to this day, is one of the most famous and controversial ophthalmologists of all time. Aldo Moro was a high-ranking Italian politician in the mid-1970s, until he was kidnapped on March 16, 1978, by a military group known as the Red Brigades. Moro had just left church and was on his way to vote in a governmental session that would approve of a new Christian Democratic Party, of which he was the leader of. This was a big deal at the time due to the political climate in Italy, and was even called one of the most important legislative sessions in 2 decades. On his way to the vote, 2 cars, one in the front and one in the back, pinned the car that Aldo was in. Once the 3 cars were at a complete stop, multiple men hopped out of the pursuing vehicles and began shooting at Aldo's car, killing everybody except for Aldo, who was miraculously only injured by the attack. The attackers then kidnapped Aldo Moro and kept him for 55 days, during which he resigned from his position within the Italian government while his kidnappers tortured him, until he was put into a basket after being told that he was going to be moved. But unfortunately, this was a partial lie. His kidnappers took him into a parking garage underground and shot into the basket, ending Aldo's life. This became known as one of the biggest political attacks in Italy's history. In the time leading up to his death, state officials were of course attempting to rescue him, and a special team was created to help find Aldo's location. Many methods were used for the investigation, but perhaps one of the most bizarre was known as the Moro Seance. I couldn't find anything about the alleged Moro Seance in any official documents, but it was written about in a book titled The Heart Attacked: Terrorism and Conflict in the Italian State, written by a woman named Alison Jameson. Jameson is known for writing books about terrorism, and from what I can see, does not dabble into the fiction genre. Back to The Heart Attacked and the Moro Seance, Jameson wrote, "On Thursday, April 6th, the inhabitants of a sleepy little village called Gradoli in the province of Viterbo must have wondered what had hit them, for their rural peace was rudely shattered by the arrival of hundreds of police and carabinieri officials with sniffer dogs and machine guns who kicked down the doors of barns, sheds, and chicken coops and insisted on searching every house. For hours, helicopters circled incessantly overhead. They would have been even more bewildered had they known that the cause of the intrusion was a spiritualist seance held 4 days earlier in a country house near Bologna, the home of a university professor. The seance had been attended by 12 people, including a number of academics and industrialists, all linked either by friendship or family ties. What had begun as a game took on a more serious tone when the spirit was asked for the whereabouts of Aldo Moro's prison. The resultant name of Gradoli was apparently unknown to all, but on production of a map, proved to be a village near Lake Bolsena. A report was duly made to the Bolognese police, hence the exhaustive but fruitless search. We can see on the map here the city of Gradoli near the Lake Bolsena. Signora Moro was convinced there was a street called Gradoli somewhere in Rome and urged the policeman to look it up. When he was unable to find it, she appealed to the senior officer and also to someone in the Christian Democrats, insisting that the street existed. She was again told that it could not be found. In fact, Via Gradoli is on any comprehensive street map of Rome. This is where things start to get a bit crazy, because it would later be discovered that Mario Moretti, the leader of the Red Brigades, actually did have a hideout on a Roman street named Gradoli. Located here was his personal apartment. It was discovered to be his when a water leak was reported by the residents of the apartment complex, and incriminating evidence was discovered in Mario's home. But according to the official sources, this had nothing to do with the alleged seance. Personally, I don't know if I'm buying the whole seance thing. That's if it even did happen. But according to this Guardian article, the seance took place on April 2nd, 1978, at the holiday home of Professor Alberto Clo, near Bologna. Mr. Prodi was among 7 academics from Bologna University who decided to, while away a rainy afternoon, with a session at the Ouija board. Asked where Mr. Moro was being held, the spirit gave several answers: Viterbo, Bolsena, and Gradoli, all towns in northern Lazio. But Gradoli, it later emerged, was also the name of a Rome street where the head of the Red Brigades was living. Now, there are a couple discrepancies between both versions of the story. The method of how the seance was conducted, with the book stating that it was with the game of the plate, and the article stating that it had been done with the use of a Ouija board. But one thing is certain, and it's that the police raid did happen in Gradoli, despite it being the city of Gradoli and not the Roman street. We have also heard of police using psychics in investigations in the past, so there may be some validity to the claims. Further into the Guardian article, it reads, "There was a comic aspect to the participant's account," he said, "but it was simply unbelievable. The senator believes the story was invented to protect the identity of the source of the information." Now, if we're going to get conspiratorial, this could make sense. Like all big political attacks, Aldo Moro's kidnapping has sprung many conspiracy theories. One theory is that the Italian government plotted against him, as he was the leader of the new Christian Democratic movement, and his death would hopefully stop the momentum of the movement. Another is that after he was kidnapped, the government simply allowed it to happen and run its course, for the same reasons as the previous theory. But one of the more interesting details within these theories is that an anti-communist secret society called the P2, or Propaganda Due, was involved in Moro's assassination. The group had been created by the Freemasons and had members in very high positions within the Italian government. I know it's sort of reaching, but stay with me. This group was very real, though at the time of Aldo's kidnapping and death, the existence of Propaganda Due was not known by anybody outside of the group. P2's existence wasn't revealed until a parliamentary commission a few years after Aldo's death officially blew the lid on the group's existence, and it would turn out that more than half of the people in charge of rescuing Aldo were members of Propaganda Due, adding to the theory that the government either planned or allowed this to happen. So, if we're trying to connect all of the dots, you could say that maybe the seance did happen, and that maybe some of the participants were in the Propaganda Due Society, who purposely fed information to the participants. But then again, the seance story could have also just been crafted in order to protect the identity of the real informant, which again, could have been a part of Propaganda Due. Though this is just my own crazy rationalization. Seeing as how this attack has been called the Italian JFK assassination, we'll probably never get the answers, but this is still a very strange and mysterious story. In 2015, reports of a 26-year-old woman by the name Zoe Fannessy began circling around online. This was because she had epilepsy, but her case was a bit different than others with the same condition. While most people with epilepsy can experience seizures caused by flashing lights, drugs, alcohol, or head injuries, to name a few, Zoe had a very specific trigger that caused her to have seizures. The trigger was the voice of popular musician Neo. Whenever Zoe heard Neo's songs, she would freeze up and vomit, according to this Daily Mail article. And while it may sound like something obscene, there's actually a type of epilepsy that is triggered by certain kinds of music. It's called muciogenic epilepsy, and in Zoe's case, Neo's voice was the trigger. Her condition was so bad that she had to wear headphones when going out in case any of Neo's music was being played around her. She first experienced seizures on New Year's Day 2006, but when she initially sought out help from doctors, they believed that she was just very tired and stressed. Unfortunately for Zoe, her seizure frequency increased to 6 a day, and after a brain scan in 2008, she was formally diagnosed with epilepsy. For about 3 years, she lived with her epilepsy, but in 2011, when Neo dropped his song, Give Me Everything, Zoe had her first music-induced seizure. When this happened, she wasn't aware that the song was the trigger for the seizure, but it happened again, about 15 times, until Zoe finally started to make the connection that Neo was causing her to experience this. She went to Sheffield's Royal Hallamshire Hospital, informing the doctors about what she believed was triggering the seizures, and after the doctors decided to test her theory out, they were surprised to see that she was correct. There are 2 quotes from the doctors. We recognized a few muciogenic seizures arising from the right temporal lobe stimulated by songs sung by Neo. During her admission, she was listening to the radio on her iPhone when a specific song came on the radio that triggers her fits, Pitbull and Neo, Tonight. After the discovery, she was diagnosed with muciogenic epilepsy. Obviously, Neo had no idea this was happening or at any fault for anything on that matter. But as he continued to grow in popularity during that era, Zoe was being terrorized, afraid that she would go out in public and hear one of his songs. Eventually, she decided to undergo a surgical procedure that removed her left temporal lobe, which the doctors believed was the place in her brain where the seizures originated. The surgery was somewhat successful, and her seizure frequency did reduce, but despite all efforts, Neo's music still triggers her to this day. However, Zoe does find humor in the story. Aside from not being able to listen to Neo, she's quoted saying, "I don't dislike Neo or his music, it just dislikes me, unfortunately." Zoe's able to laugh at her situation, but says she has to ask DJs when she goes out sometimes to avoid playing Neo. Still, removing part of your brain sounds terrifying to me, but from the looks of it, Zoe has continued living her life as best as she can. I tried to look to see if Neo was aware of the situation, but I couldn't find anything about it online. Again, none of this is his fault, but I was still curious to see what I could find. Hopefully, Zoe is able to avoid his music as much as possible. But like she said, if he ever releases the greatest hits album, it's going to be a nightmare. Everyone's heard some form of child song game. From Ring Around the Rosie to the London Bridge, it seems like every culture has their own song game that children sing and play to. But there is one game whose origins and lyric meanings are seemingly unknown, and it comes from Japan. The game is called Kagome Kegome, and the song sounds like this. Despite its popularity, no one seems to know where the song came from, or what its words really mean. We can see here in a 5-year-old post from a deleted Reddit account on the r/unresolved mysteries subreddit that this user attempts to shed some light on the song's origins. The mysterious traditional Japanese song and game of Kagome Kegome. No one knows what the cryptic lyrics and the game means. It's a game where children would form a circle around the oni, translates into demon. It's a word that describes many Japanese evil supernatural entities. but in the context of Japanese children's games, it's used to describe the player that is it, like the chaser in tag or the seeker in hide and seek, and walk around the oni in a circle while singing the song. The oni is either blindfolded or must have their eyes closed. When the song stops, the walking stops too, and then the oni must guess the person directly behind them. The below are the lyrics translated to English, taken from the Wikipedia page above. Kagome is not translated because it's unclear what it means. Please refer to the Wikipedia page on the different interpretations of the word. Also, the "when will it come out" part is also debated. In Japanese, it is, but there are also many possible interpretations. Kagome Kegome, the bird in the basket. When, oh when will it come out? In the night of dawn. The crane and the turtle slipped. Who is behind you now? Cranes and turtles are traditionally symbols of good luck and long life in Japanese culture. At first, the words don't appear to be very dark, but there are many theories as to what they truly mean, some of which are provided by the deleted Redditor. Some popular theories. It sings about a pregnant woman being pushed off a flight of stairs, crane and turtle slipping, and as a result, miscarrying her child. She wonders who pushed her off. Who is behind you now? It sings about a prostitute, bird in a cage, wondering who her next client is. Who is behind you now? She wonders when she could escape the cage. When, oh when, will it come out? It's a curse. Dawn of night, crane and turtle slip. It's a song in Hebrew. Some who believe in the Japanese Jewish common ancestor theory claim that it sings about protecting a sacred treasure in Hebrew. It's a song about a religious ritual. The cryptic and ominous lyrics are a mystery to all, especially because the game is very well known despite its creepiness. There is no Japanese person who does not know about Kagome Kegome. I remember playing it myself in kindergarten. What are your thoughts on this? Though perhaps one of the darkest origin theories that was not listed by this Redditor comes from World War II era Japan, specifically when Nazi officials running an orphanage in the Japanese prefecture of Shimane conducted experiments on the children, hoping to find a type of switch within people's brains that caused them to slowly age and eventually pass away, thinking that if they somehow managed to turn this switch off, that they would have the keys to immortality. These experiments, which involved opening up and removing sections of the children's brains, took the lives of many. But some of the children would come out of the experiments acting extremely happy, to a very creepy and odd degree. Initially, this was seen as a success, but as time went by, these children would begin to act strange. It's reported that if the children managed to get one of the orphanage caretakers alone, that their mood would immediately change from extremely happy to angry and full of hatred. The children would surround the caretaker in a circle and sing the Kagome Kegome song, torturing the caretakers and leaving them scared for their lives. Of course, this is just the urban legend, but we do know that during World War II, the Japanese and the Nazis conducted extremely horrific experiments on countless individuals, and some of these experiments were so secretive that the identities and true counts of the victims were never revealed. Not to mention that the Nazis believed in some pretty weird and supernatural things. So there could be some truth to the story, at least about the song originating from one of these bizarre experiment camps. Creepy origin theories about children's games are not too uncommon. Still, it's fascinating to see how something as innocent as a child's game can have such a dark meaning behind it, even if it isn't all true. Some of these theories still attach themselves to the games, and seemingly live on within them. It's really up to what you believe in, but I'm curious if there are any Japanese watchers out there with extra context about Kagome Kegome. So if you're out there, please let us know in the comments. In 1990, around 8,000 students from the European country of Kosovo suddenly fell ill to what at the time was labeled as a mystery illness. While it was thought to be a mystery, things would take a much darker tone when experts began theorizing on what had actually happened. This mystery illness happened almost exclusively in schools, from as early as kindergarten schools to as late as high schools, and there are even hours of documentation from the whole ordeal. But despite this and the large amount of victims, the cause of the illness has never officially been revealed. There are many theories as to what had happened to cause this mass illness, but in order to understand the lack of answers, we have to first understand what was going on in Kosovo and the surrounding regions at that time. In the late 1800s, the Albanian people were expelled from their homeland by the state previously known as Yugoslavia. As a result, many of the Albanians ended up further south, and one of the regions many Albanians resettled into was Kosovo, which we can see on this map is right in the middle of present-day Serbia and Albania. Tensions for the Albanians continued like this for a long time, and in the early 1900s during the Balkan Wars, many Albanians were massacred in horrific and cruel ways, which brings us to the Kosovo school incident. Before I continue, I will again state that an official cause was never given out, but through my own research and other strong theories from doctors and even government officials at that time, I feel comfortable enough to present this story the way that I am. On the 22nd of March 1990, students from close to about 20 schools began passing out, convulsing, and vomiting profusely. Students would cry out in pain in the hallways, and as panic began to grow, many were rushed to the hospital. Doctors conducted tests on the students, but despite their efforts, answers were not given as to what was causing the illness. One doctor believed that the higher-ups at the hospital, who were closely connected to the Serbian government, were actively making an effort to not give out the real cause. The cause that they gave out was that the students' calcium levels were extremely low. He would be quoted saying, "All those patients came with symptoms of numbness with cramps which were typical of a condition of hypocalcemia, which causes muscle stiffness. The treatment was done according to the symptoms. Most of the students had to be treated with calcium for hours, which shows that they had a hypercalcemia not caused by the state of anxiety, but by some agency that reached the organism through the respiratory tract." I presented this data at the Symposium on Poisoning, which was held in Zagreb, and I remember the reaction of the professor from Belgrade, who was a neuropsychiatrist, because the thesis of the Serbs at the time was that these were panic attacks. Therefore, a representative that they sent was a neuropsychiatrist and not a poisoning expert. But this doctor was far from the only one. Many doctors reported having difficulties providing the proper care for the students due to their admin in the hospitals either giving out wrong information or taking too long to provide any information at all. Mazlum Belegu, the director of blood transfusions at one of these hospitals, said this: "There has been no greater pain than seeing those manifestations of poisoning in children. Everything that happens to children, to adults is more stable. The adult copes with it. But to see the children trembling, not being able to stand on their own 2 feet, not even to talk or anything. I remember someone saying, 'Is this war?' I said, 'No, this is not war. This is more than war.' Children become like that. I don't know what kind of soul and heart they had." Coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally at all, the schools that were affected by this illness were all segregated Albanian schools, and reportedly, leading up to the incidents, students reported noticing a white powdery substance on some of their desks. The substance that, when touched, caused them to develop symptoms of the mystery illness. But despite the victims' conditions, some hospitals did not accept the 6 students, and claimed that they were all just acting. The first blood samples from the incident were handed over to the Yugoslav government, which controlled and conducted the tests, and after 3 days, they came back to conclude that there was no type of poisoning in the blood of the victims, something that the doctors, as we saw, found very suspicious. Independent French doctors had also conducted tests on the blood from the students, and they stated that the blood work indicated that something like a pesticide might be the culprit of the sickness. Albanian doctors also challenged the initial conclusion done by the Yugoslav investigation, but their appeal was rejected and the investigation went nowhere. Theories about this began to grow, and one of them was that the original blood samples had somehow disappeared. Furthermore, some Albanian doctors even stated that the samples they were scheduled to receive had never reached them. But there's little evidence to back these claims. Some reports even came out that thieves were seen coming in and out of these schools where the white powdery substance was detected, leading to many believing that these thieves had planted some form of poison in the schools. But again, the government at the time denied any involvement of poison for this incident. Eventually, this incident began to get labeled as a case of mass hysteria, and no matter how many experts attempted to give a real explanation for the incident, all theories were rejected, and nobody was ever held responsible for the attack. Now, the reason I personally believe this was an attack is of course the tensions between the Balkans and the Albanians, but also because the school poisoning happened only 1 year before the Yugoslav War, which occurred partially as the result of the ethnic tensions in Yugoslavia. During these wars, the Albanians were yet again intensely persecuted. It's just very coincidental that only segregated Albanian schools were affected by this illness, and that the Yugoslav authorities conducting the tests ultimately concluded that nothing was going on. But also the fact that this happened the year prior to the start of the Yugoslav wars indicates, at least to me, that this could have been a targeted attack against the Albanian people. And before you start calling me crazy, here's an archived release from 1999 by the United States Department of State, which confirms that the Serbs and Yugoslav forces committed an ethnic cleansing on the Albanians in the Kosovo region. Given all of this information, I think it's reasonable to assume that the Kosovo school poisonings were in fact a poisoning attack, and that the government, like any government committing a genocide, was attempting to hide the truth. To this day, there are people still trying to get down to the bottom of what exactly happened, but as of right now, it doesn't seem like any information will come out. But still, it's important to shed light on this story, because if a state committing atrocities like this successfully hides their tracks and gets little to no pushback from the rest of the world, they almost certainly will continue to do things like this and escalate to even worse levels. Keeping with the theme from the last entry in our iceberg, we have the Hollinwell incident that occurred in July of 1980. This incident is eerily similar to the Kosovo poisonings, though this time, it happened at the Hollinwell Showground located in Nottinghamshire, England. It was July 13th to be exact, when the Hollinwell Showgrounds were set to host a juvenile marching band competition in which children from as young as 5 years old to mid-teens gathered from all over Europe to perform and raise money for charity. In total, around 500 children and 11 marching bands were in attendance. Things were getting ready to begin when, at around 10:30 a.m., the children began to suddenly vomit, cry out in pain, and even collapse entirely, with some even reportedly foaming at the mouth. Spectators who witnessed this began to panic, and soon, the entire show came to an abrupt stop. The police and paramedics quickly took over and began providing help for the sick children, while also attempting to determine the cause of the sickness. Around 300 children in total displayed symptoms. Some cases were mild, however others had to be rushed to the hospital. Thankfully, nobody lost their life, but despite having a large number of victims, a physical cause for the incident was never found. Once everything was over, the authorities just ruled it as a case of mass hysteria and attempted to quickly move on. But this, like the Kosovo incident, did not go over well with the families of the children who had gotten sick. A BBC article quotes the mother of one of the victims. "My daughter was home for 2 hours before she was took poorly," she says. "So where's your theory there?" The families were not the only ones left unsatisfied. Over the years, people have looked back at the incident with skepticism. Members of parliament have even gone as far as claiming that the investigation was not taken as seriously as it should have, and some theories have come out in an attempt to explain what happened. There are two major theories. One was the use of pesticides in the field, though the pesticides that were used in the field were sprayed a few days prior, and by then should have had no effect on anybody. However, in 2003, a television show called Inside Out revealed that the region in the area was using a pesticide called tridmorph, which had been banned in the year 2000 due to the World Health Organization labeling it as mildly hazardous. Despite this being around 2 decades prior to the Hollinwell incident, official reports from the incident did state that a pesticide containing tridmorph called calaxin was used during that time. which does line up with the theory. But the second theory, and one that I lean towards the most, was the overcleaning of the chemical toilets used for the event. Reportedly, the toilets had been overcleaned according to this BBC article. Bleach powder was heavily used and a strong smell of chlorine and ammonia was present around the area where the toilets were located, which was only about 20 yards from where the children performers were stationed. Mixing chlorine and ammonia can result in a chemical reaction that creates a toxic gas. It's often thought to be mustard gas, though that's a common misconception. Regardless, the toxic fumes created by mixing bleach and ammonia are similar to those of mustard gas, whose chemical name is bis-2-chloroethyl sulfide. The chemical created by mixing the two cleaners is called chloramine. Inhaling chloramine fumes can result in coughing, throat irritation, shortness of breath, and even trigger asthma attacks. If it was the case that the workers at the event had accidentally mixed the two cleaners while cleaning the toilets, then this could be a good explanation for what caused this incident to occur. I would also like to add to this theory because I was actually in band all throughout junior high and halfway through high school, and can attest that before any performance, the entire band had to warm up, which consisted of doing breathing exercises, stretching, and of course playing our instruments. Now, if these toxic fumes were only 20 yards away from the performers, then I could see how they would be more susceptible to inhaling them and getting sick. As far as mass hysteria, while it is possible, especially to a large group of young and impressionable children, I'm not really buying this theory. It just seems to me that a lot of times a mass hysteria conclusion is given as a cop-out when investigations are not taken seriously, or even when attempting to diminish an incident's severity. I find the toilet cleaning theory a lot more believable than mass hysteria, and more plausible than the pesticide theory, seeing as how the toilets would have been cleaned before and during the event, unlike the pesticides that were used days before. To this day, the Hollinwell incident is still officially unsolved, but that hasn't stopped people from all walks of life to look into it and attempt to find the answers out for themselves. Our last entry into the iceberg is the story of a Brazilian man by the name Jose Antonio da Silva, who was allegedly abducted by aliens in 1969. The story goes that Jose, who was an off-duty Brazilian soldier, planned a fishing trip on May 3rd at a lake in Bebedouro, Matosinhos, Brazil. When he got to the lake, Jose began to set up his area with his fishing and camping gear before going to bed to get ready for the next day. Though to his surprise, when he woke up, he had slept through the whole morning and into mid-afternoon. He was surprised that he had slept that long, but he still got ready to go fishing. As he was getting his things together, Jose began to hear noises coming from a nearby bush. He turned towards the source of the noise and was allegedly struck by a beam of light that made him freeze. Shortly after, 2 4-foot-tall humanoid creatures stepped out from the bush and took him into what was described as a cylindrical-shaped craft. Inside the strange craft, Jose was set onto a chair inside of a very brightly lit room where he was fitted with a strange helmet and taken somewhere unknown before being transferred into another room in which Jose noticed several human corpses. In this new room, he saw what he described as red-haired beings that resembled humans, except for the fact that they had very large eyes and extremely wide mouths. The beings had allegedly offered Jose a deal to work with them through a series of gestures. The deal was that he would stay on Earth for 3 years, helping them collect specimen samples, after which he was to go on and live with them in their world for 7 years, before ultimately returning back to Earth so that he could live out the rest of his life. However, Jose did not want any part of this and rejected their offer, seemingly angering the beings. He was terrified, but despite the anger he caused, Jose was blindfolded again and began to lose consciousness. When he started to come to, he recalled being dragged out of the craft and being dumped in the forest. Jose then passed out again and woke up the next morning. Once he had fully woken up, he discovered that he was at least 200 miles from the location that he had been picked up from. So he began walking until he found the road and managed to get the attention of a driver. He asked them what day it was and found out that he had been missing for around 4 whole days. He reported the incident to the local authorities, but his case was quickly dismissed as a hallucination or a hoax. Jose remained steadfast in his account, and over the years, his story has been cited in ufological circles as one of the most compelling abduction cases in Brazil. But like every other abduction story, there is no evidence that helps back up Jose's claims, other than his own testimony on what he experienced. And that wraps up this episode of our Obscure and Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg series. If you made it this far, leave a like, and let me know which entry was your favorite down in the comments. Don't forget to turn on post notifications so that you don't miss out on the next upload. And as always, thanks for watching.